You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to the Successful Screenwriter Podcast, where we discuss anything and everything screenwriting. Here we interview successful screenwriters and filmmakers to find out just what it takes to make it in the industry. Before we get into this episode, I wanted to take a moment and thank you for listening to this show. Because of your support, we were just listed as a top 20 screenwriting podcast you must follow in 2021 by FeedSpot. I am truly honored by this, and I want you to know that I will continue reaching out to people who can help your path toward finding success. In this episode, my guest is Justin Sloan, who was a games writer at TellTale Games and will discuss his experiences there and share some tips. Having been cooped up in quarantine for a while, we did this episode outside, which is why I'd like to thank my surprising co-host, that bird who wouldn't stop singing its song. Sing on, little friend, sing on. Now, let's get to the show. All right, welcome to the show. We have on an awesome guest today, Justin Sloan. He has worked with TellTale Games on such games as Minecraft, Game of Thrones, The Walking Dead, and Tales from the Borderlands, on top of his own novels that he's written, as well as some feature films. Justin, thanks for being on the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So if we could just focus a little bit on your breakout into writing for TellTale, because I know that you served in the military, and from then you went into the Veteran Writings Program. So how did you land writing for TellTale?
Yeah, so that was part of my big escape from the corporate world, or it wasn't really corporate, government world endeavor there. So I was working, I'd gone off after the Marines. I went off to do all the college stuff and thought I had to get a normal job, and be able to pay the bills. And so I did an international relations and economics master's degree and thought that's my career path. And then it was a different trajectory for sure. So at the time I did like a treasury internship and a Nikkei Shimbun, which is like the Japanese economics newspaper internship research program thing. I did all these things and I was like, this is my path. And I get to the Federal Reserve Bank as an Asia analyst, which I thought was like my kind of ultimate goal. And then like right away, I was like, oh, wow, what have I done? Where did I put myself in this weird position that makes no sense for me? Because it wasn't, interesting at all for my tastes. And so I like learning about this stuff, but I really don't like doing it as a job is what I discovered in that whole process. And so I started writing in 2010. So by the time I got to the Federal Reserve of San Francisco, that was 2012. Yeah, 2012. So I'd already been writing for a couple of years, but I hadn't been pursuing it as a career. But at that point, I realized a couple of months into it, and I was there for 2 years. But a couple of months into it, I was starting to think, wow, I need to figure out how to go creative. I need to figure out how to make this my life, because if I'm so obsessed with it that I'm waking up at 3 or 4 in the morning to write before going to work, and if I get a lunch break and stuff like that, trying to just get the stuff in, how can I make this reality? And so I started reaching out to everybody I knew, doing just, a big thing in the government and all these positions is going for informational interviews. You say, hey, can we grab a coffee? And I just want to pick your brain about your office and how I can get involved. And so I started doing that a lot more. And I met some people at Pixar, two of them, who both got on the phone with me and gave me advice. And it was awesome. One of them was basically you're never going to find a writing job. They're just so impossible to find. Good luck. They went over to TellTale Games, from Pixar. Okay. About 6 months after I talked with them. And both of them, were there. So I reached out to them and I said, hey, what's this TellTale place? What is it? And I started Googling it and researching more about it. And finally, there was a job opening for a writer. I had applied as a storyboard artist, but didn't go anywhere. And the writer one started happening. The interviews were happening. And I emailed one of them and said, hey, I'm interviewing for this job. What do you think of the chances? Can you tell me more about it? And he's like, well, first of all, if you get the job, I'm going to be your boss. So I'll see you in the interviews. And so that was pretty cool because we already had this rapport started, right? We already knew how passionate I was. We had kept in touch a little bit over that 6 month period where I was taking some writing courses he had recommended, like the UCLA professional program. that course. They do like an evening thing where you from 7 o'clock to 10 o'clock, and you network and you workshop and all that. So anyway, I did a few of those things, and interviews happened, and I got the job, and I escaped to TellTale Games.
Awesome. So you had one guy that didn't believe in you and another guy that did believe in you. That guy ended up at TellTale, and he just kind of found out that they had openings over there, and you went for it. You shot your shot.
I wouldn't say that he didn't believe in me as much as he, the first one, like knew how hard it is to get into some of these jobs, and was like, just to set your expectations realistic. I'm glad you have a passion, but it's tough unless you know somebody or whatever. It's tough. My lesson from this whole thing is, unless you know somebody, but you can just go out there and meet somebody. So there's ways to get to know the right people, of course. And since then, I saw other people who went to like the GDC, the games conference in San Francisco, and they networked with the right people, and then that's how they got in while I was there. And so it's all just about this getting in, showing your face to the right people and saying, hey, I'm passionate, I'm obsessed. How do I get in the door? And eventually some people will probably help you, unless you're a complete horrible person and you're rude and you just approach it the wrong way.
All right. So side notes on that. So working for TellTale, what did you end up writing? Did you end up writing a lot of dialogue trees? What were you focusing on?
Yeah, TellTale is very much just like screenwriting. So it's very much just you're writing a screenplay. You're writing the whole narration part of it. You're writing the dialogue part of it. The difference there being you're a lot more focused, of course, on player agency. So what kind of role the player has involved with the storytelling. Okay. And in our case, at TellTale, a lot of that has to do with character choices. So you will say something to me, I'll pop up with 3 choices and a silent option. And hopefully those choices have a different range, whether it's emotional or something else. The character's probably in a certain trajectory as far as the story and emotions are concerned.
Right.
But maybe there's a range within that, like, do I want to be a jerk to this guy right now? Do I want to be kind of nice? Do I want to, be a little condescending? Or, there's like ranges that aren't so different sometimes. It's not like happy, sad, mad or whatever.
Right.
But there's a little bit of, and so we think about that. And then what is some fun, quippy response to that the NPCs can say, so that I, as a player, know that they're actually paying attention to what I'm saying. And hopefully we have little callbacks to those later, to the big ones especially, where it's like, oh, remember that thing you said an hour ago? Well, now that guy just punched you in the face and stole your girl or something.
So how much of that is outlined in the writer's room? How much of that do you have control over as a writer for a game like that?
Yeah, well, I worked on, so my main participation in The Walking Dead was on a spinoff called The Walking Dead Michonne. Mm-hmm. And so for that, I was heavily involved in the writer's room part of it, meaning the brainstorming part of it. So we went in there and we came up with a lot of the main outline and a lot of the big choices. When you're actually then going into writing, and I only worked on I think 1 or 2 big scenes on that as far as a writer is concerned, with the writing part of it after the brainstorming. But in that part, you can come up with a lot more of the choice moments. Yeah. And, just as they come to you. And of course, there's going to be a lead writer. So the way we worked is we'd have like 4 or 5 writers per episode usually, and the lead writer. Some games did it differently. Like Wolf Among Us, I think, was only 1 or 2 writers on the whole thing.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, so quite different. But at least on the Michonne one, it was like 4 or 5 writers per episode, and then different writers on each episode sometimes, depending. So kind of interesting. But yeah, we outline a lot of it. We outline the whole story as much as we can. And there's a big expectation that it could totally change. And that one changed quite a lot, and a lot of them changed quite a lot.
I bet.
I think that's kind of, and we have a big review process. We had a big review process where you get in the room and you share everything, and then all the execs are there giving their feedback, and so you have this built-in, idea, just kind of like Pixar and that whole creative idea thing there, where you're going to be looking at the story, looking at the animatics, the early stage animation for it, and thinking, how can we make this way better, and not be afraid to throw everything out, and hopefully not start over from scratch, but on that scene, maybe start over from scratch.
Right. And so with Game of Thrones and like Minecraft, same overall?
Yeah. It varies. I was a lead on an episode of the Minecraft one, so that was pretty cool on that one. I think I only had 1 or 2 people working with me. Wow. And then there's like weird stories I can share. For example, like one day I was supposed to have I guess I was supposed to do this thing that usually takes 2 weeks. Yeah. And I found out like that morning I was supposed to present on it in 4 hours to the head of the studio, and I was supposed to have it done. And I'm like, but it's 4 hours and it's supposed to take 2 weeks. Yeah. So there's like these moments where you're just totally baffled, where you're supposed to have a system in place, but I don't know what happened with that situation. I don't know
Right.
if somebody was like, hey, let's get this to the boss because he's in today or what. It's like, did you just forget about it having a schedule in place? Did you forget to tell me 2 weeks
Yeah.
ago? Nobody ever explained what happened with that. But lots of fun as far as you have a system in place, but it's always changing because every game is different and lead writers might be different or designer might not like it that
Right.
way or producer or whatever. So lots of fluidity.
So what is the big myth around TellTale? Because TellTale was huge. They came out, they had big titles. I mean, I remember playing Minecraft. I mean, I remember playing Tales from the Borderlands, which were great games. You know, it's awesome that you got to be a writer on those. So they had these big properties, and then one day they just vanished. So what happened, if we can get a little skinny on that?
Yeah, I don't know if it's secret or not because I heard it and I wasn't there when I heard it. I left a year and a half or so before they closed. So I was there for 2 years total and then left a year and a half before that. And but just what I heard is they overextended themselves. You know,
Yeah.
they kept getting all these big IP projects that you have to pay lots of money for. And they had all these investors, but then everything was built up to where whatever profits they were making were kind of leveling out with the amount of investors that they had, and to the point where they were overextended. So if one investor just didn't come through, then everything crumbles and falls apart. And I think I hear that's what happened. But like I said, I wasn't there in the room or any of that stuff.
Wow, that's crazy that they were that overextended.
Isn't that ridiculous? So it teaches you a life lesson, you know, too, on your own projects to not put yourself in that situation.
It sounds like it sounds like every project they came out with was to save the company then. If they were extending that much, then they almost got stuck in this loop of having to go bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah. And I know like the CEO left like 10 months before that or something. I forget the exact amount of time. So yeah, I would love to know as well, like, was he aware of that situation? Did these other guys who come in and destroy it? How depressing that is, right? To like know that some other people took over your company and then 10 months later it just goes away. This baby that you created and built up, right?
I know, because it was such a well-loved, I mean, people would brag about TellTale, like, wow, this game is so good, and you know, it's involved. Yeah. And I remember when Borderlands came out, people were like, oh, it's going to be trash, and it was great. And same thing with Minecraft. People were like, oh, you can't do a story mode on Minecraft, and then here you go, my kid's playing it, loving it. So, I mean, obviously...
It's like the biggest interactive on Netflix. So.
Huh?
I just say yes. So the biggest interactive show on Netflix, that Minecraft story mode thing, because they can put it on Netflix and you play with your TV remote or something weird. I don't know.
Oh, that is so cool!
Crazy.
I didn't even know you could do that.
Yeah, it's on Netflix right now.
Oh, that's super neat. So after you left TellTale, what made you decide to move on from there?
Multiple things. One was like how that was handled. That one moment I was talking about specifically. Right. I was just like, what is this? And then there was there were moments I was trying to do my own thing too, you know, because I love doing my own projects as well.
Right.
And there was a point for like when I was on that project, especially where I was getting up at 4 a.m. to work, driving to work, you know, working until whatever time, coming home, putting my kids to bed, and then staying up till midnight again. I'm like, I'm getting like 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night. This is crazy. And then one of the lead writers took me aside one day because I was like, well, how am I going to make this work? And he's like, listen, you can't. You either have to work in the game industry and not have kids, or you have to get out of the game industry and have your kids. There's not like this in between ground that you're trying to do. I was like, thanks, big guy.
I've heard that. I mean, I've heard that with the game industry that they work you 16 plus hour days, and it can happen. Insane.
To counter that, I've worked at a couple places since then, 2 or 3 studios. One is a full-time contract, others as full-time, like freelance position.
Okay, yeah.
And none of them have been like that. So there's one where it was kind of like you put what you want into it, where you could still be up doing those crazy weird hours, but it's not like they expect you to do 16-hour days. It's just they expect you to be working at weird hours.
Okay.
And it wasn't even an expectation though. It wasn't like you have to be here at this time. It was just everybody else was doing it. And if you're not there, you're kind of left out of the loop, you know? But there's other place I worked, a mobile game company, and mobile writing is its own thing. You know, it's very different. It's not as, for me, at least, it wasn't as creatively, awesome.
Yeah.
But what was cool about it was they were very good about the hours. They were like, hey, we want you to work your 8 hours. If you feel like you're going over that, stop and let us know, because that means we're doing this wrong. The producers are not doing their job properly. So we want you to do your 8 hours and plan accordingly and update us and let us know what's going on. And it was exactly as they said it was going to be too. It just worked out great. The pay was a little bit better because I guess mobile, maybe it's easier to make money there. I don't know. Maybe they were just nicer people. Yeah.
You made
So
you
it's
made
not
better
always like
money
that.
at mobile gaming than you did at TellTale Games.
Oh, TellTale, I'm just going to be honest with that. They were horrible about pay. It was so
What?
miserable as far as the pay is concerned.
Oh
It's like
my
Disney, you know,
God.
you hear these stories about Disney and these other companies who everybody wants to work there, so they feel like they can do
Yeah.
what they want as far as that stuff's concerned. But if you look on Glassdoor.com, there's a range of pay that people reported during that time. I don't know if it's still up there. But
Wow.
yeah, so this is not inside knowledge because it wasn't me looking at other people's paychecks. I never could do that.
Well,
But
I
if you
mean,
look at
it's just
Glassdoor, there was a range of like 45 to 120. So for writers.
that's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
So writing for mobile is a different platform all in general, right? If writing for Telltale is more script based, is writing for mobile the same?
There's some mobile games that are more like that, right? Like Choices and these other
Okay.
games that like Pocket Gems
Yeah.
does, where it's much more along those lines. And then there's these mobile interactive stories now that are out there. So there's obviously that range. But the one I was on specifically, it was really cool, but it was very much like you come up with a lot of jokes all day long.
Okay.
And so it's like interactions between the characters, but how do I make another joke or something? It doesn't have to be a joke per se, but something that's fun, you know, that's
Right.
But instead of like telling a big story and having characters respond to that, it's like, okay, here's a 3 or 4 character interaction. Here's this one
You're
with like
working
5
in
lines, or this
scenes.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's very, very like quick, like boom, 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 and then that's it. And then you can't, you know, really relate to the other ones because you don't know in what order the character might have done all that.
Oh,
So
wow.
every single one of them is just kind of self-contained. It's like, oh, here's another little 4 or 5 line exchange. Here's another 4 or 5. And so
Yeah.
for me, it's like, wow, it's kind of cool, but to do that for like the next 10 years, I'd probably go insane.
It
Yeah.
sounds like really hard to sit there and try and bang out multiple instances like that. I mean, that could be draining eventually where you get to the point where like, is this even funny? You know, I
imagine
could see
some
that
writers
running.
are better at that than, you know, the other thing.
Yeah.
But, you know, like we all have our skills, and I definitely feel like I'm more of a novelist at times, or, you know, a big picture story writer on screenplays at times.
Right.
And some people I think are great at those little exchanges and just coming up with the little silly, fun, you know, comedy types, like stand-up comedy bits, basically.
I know some writers will use like LinkedIn to try and find openings as for writers. Is that something that you would suggest, or on top of just using your network, or what are some good ways for writers to get out there and try and find a job as a mobile game writer?
Yeah, there's a lot of openings that they post on LinkedIn for sure. Jam City posts there quite often. I've seen others as well. Pocket Gems used to. I don't know if they still are hiring or not, what they're doing. But I mostly use LinkedIn, I think.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's the game magazines and whatnot will post some, like Gama Sutra posts their post-game jobs on there. And
cool.
There's some good Facebook groups, like just a game writers Facebook group that has a lot of postings. And so I found some little freelance gigs through that.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. You know, it's a weird thing too, thinking about like what you want to charge when you do the freelance thing. That could be a whole nother topic that I've been discovering more about myself lately, like hourly versus salary or fixed amount or all this stuff.
Yeah, freelance is crazy because some people just want a fixed amount gig. Some people want hourly, and then if it is like a mobile freelance gig, they want to track you as you're writing, and like that to me is just like, okay, that's crazy. I'd like here's a flat rate.
Yeah,
I'll write it when I have the time to write it. Yeah,
exactly. And it's weird too because if you go on hourly, I feel like it's not worth it because you have so much of the stuff you have to consider and be thinking about and whatnot that, I mean, unless you count your thought process hours or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I totally get it. I was interviewing Travis Malloy, who did Pandorum and Infinity Chamber, and he was talking about trying to come up with the ending for the movie, and he couldn't come up with the ending, so then he took his dog for a walk. And that's how he came up with the ending. And I think, exactly. How many times where I'm like, I don't know what's going on, and I just go for a drive, you know, and then I figure it out somewhere where I'm stuck in traffic.
Yeah. Yeah, it's also like you don't want to. Some people out there might have done some ghostwriting on novels or whatnot, and it's a very different hourly rate that you want to think about for like games, or word rate too. Like what you charge per word on a lot of the ghostwriting gigs. Like you don't want to think about that the same way in a lot of these games gigs because you're doing like these dialogues and you have these little emotions you have to put in there and these little code things sometimes too. And yeah, it's a weird beast.
So it's a different software that you're using. You're not using like a screenwriting software. Then you're using something else that allows you. Is it like proprietary?
Depends on the game, yeah. So Telltale, we had their own tool that they developed.
Okay.
And then one game I worked on, we used Final Draft, and then another we used Excel to just put some stuff in there with the little code things. Yeah, so it's really, really varies. I think on that mobile one, it was Excel, I think. So then you have the programming team that goes in and plugs everything in.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it sounds wild. That's like a whole new skill to learn.
Yeah, well, that was like one job I took that was really cool. They're doing this fantasy game that'll probably come out in like another year or so. Yeah, I liked the concept of it, but I just hated having to write all the little programming language things and all the little parentheses emotion things and all that. And it just got old. And I'm
it sounds like coding.
Yeah, it was part coding. I was like, you could just pay somebody else to do that part of it, like half of what you're paying me, and I'll just write the stuff. But when you're doing all that other stuff, it's just such a change in mindset that for me, I'm like, I could get twice as much done on a screenplay than doing this. So I'm not going to spend my time doing it.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, that's kind of the great thing about doing freelance stuff is you pick where you want to go.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So you're a novelist as well. You're writing your own novels and you're also a screenwriter. So what do you have like going on nowadays?
Yeah, a few things. Very excited about a novel that's getting promoted by a thing called BookBub, which is a big site that does. Yeah. When you get a BookBub, it's like the magic, So everybody gets all pumped up about that and shares it and gets all these other promos around it and whatnot. So I'm having some authors share. So that's a book called Starforged. It's the first book in my Ascension Gate series. Yeah, it's like sci-fi. It's kind of Star Wars-ish, but yeah, it's insane. So I'm writing the 5th book in that series.
Oh, wow.
With the hopes of getting it out when that BookBub goes live, May 26th. So I don't know if that'll be after this episode airs or not, but how that works. So I'm working on that.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
And, and on the screenwriting side, we have some cool things going on lately that I've been part of where I'm kind of executive producing some shows or some movies and writing on them as well, some of them. And so one we're having go that I was mentioning to you before is an animation. Yeah. It's exciting for me because I started like my first screenplays ever were animated screenplays just because I love that kind of stuff. Oh, like cool. I wasn't thinking I'll sell them. I was just thinking I want to write some screenplay stuff. I'll do it because I like it. And with 3 kids, too, that's especially important for me right now because they're young and I want to get something that they can watch. There's no heads getting torn off or anything,
Oh, for more family stuff. That's good.
Yeah. So this one's going to be more in line with that kind of stuff, like Lion King meets Kung Fu Panda meets whatever else there is. But,
cool. Very good.
So that's fun. We have our artists starting up already, and we have the script is finalized, and that's very exciting. I'm thinking about getting a script. What do you call it? Like a writer's assistant for that for these kind of things that we have coming on next, so that we can have somebody to just be ready at all times. I have buddies and other coworkers that we can share ideas with, but I'm like, if I pay somebody, then they have to respond right away and get on it when I say to.
You sound like a producer.
Trying to level up. Yeah. I like being the producer too. It's a lot of fun. Like my buddy who's now co-writing on this with me, he was always telling me before that I should be a producer because that's the kind of stuff that gets me all excited. I'm getting on the phone with people and I'm like, let's do this. Hey, what do you think about on our project? And it's a lot of fun for me. Sometimes I love writing, but I have to be really passionate about the project. Mm-hmm. If I'm not, I've noticed at times I'll have like a week or two in between, like usually around the middle point of the novel or something where I just hit a wall and I'm like, I don't have writer's block per se. I just hit why the hell does this book matter at all? And then
you go into the writer's dread.
Yeah.
That's not uncommon.
Like, nobody cares. Yeah.
Why am I even doing this? Nobody's going to read it.
Yeah.
I totally get it, dude. Yeah. It's crazy to think that somebody as successful as yourself, who has been out there, who has done the hustle, who has achieved some pretty serious credits, can still run into that situation, that writer's dread of like where you're like wondering, am I wasting my time? I run into it myself. So it's great to, I don't mean it great in that way, but it's good to see that, somebody as successful as yourself can still be human like that. And if it should be out there for any beginner writers out there to know, like the struggle is real, man. It's not just you. Like everybody has that in them.
Yeah. And I think that's something you get too, as you go longer is like, even if you have a lot of things that take off and do quite well, and I've had a few that have done quite well, there's still misses, maybe you're targeting the wrong crowd, or like even if your agent is your reader, right, you might write something that's just not for them. And that was a big lesson I learned at TellTale too. Going back to that, is you have your audience, right, your crowd, and it was very evident. It's very evident when you're writing books or reading reviews on George R. R. Martin's books or Brandon Sanderson's books. Like, I love those writers, but there's so many people who just despise and hate those writers. And it's similar, like at TellTale, you'll have like half the company who's like, oh, wow, this is so hilarious. Oh my God, this is the best. And then the next day you get somebody who comes across and is like, oh, what? That stuff by Sloane. Ugh. And it's just, it's, you have to have your audience, right? And know who your audience is. And as a writer, I'm very passionate about stories I write. So I like to cater to that. And so I'm not always going to be just focused on writing something that one audience necessarily likes. I'm writing something that I care about at the moment. And yeah. So, which kind of sucks because I'd love to just be a commercial writer sometimes, you know?
I think you got to have that passion if you want to connect with somebody. I mean, I remember writing my book, and when I would have that sense of dread, I'm doing the second edition right now, and I'll go and I'll write a bunch for the new, and I'll be like, is anybody even going to care? You know, and so when I'm writing this, but I try and think like, if I like this, there's somebody else that's going to like this. Right. Sure. And so that's the kind of the mentality I try and have with it. And I also think if you don't have your critics, you're not doing it right. Because if you're that guy that makes everybody happy, then there's probably it's probably just fluff and there's no substance. So if you're doing something where people don't like it, I think that's a good thing.
Sure. There's also the idea that sometimes things might not find an audience right away, but they will later. And I've seen that happen lately. I've had a producer who got really excited about two of my scripts that I wrote that were 7 years ago. You know, I wrote them 7 years ago. And so I'm just thinking they're dead at this point. And then this producer comes along and read something else, but she's like, this wasn't quite for me. Here's 4 things I'm looking for. And I was like, I got 2 things that fall under these 2 categories right here. You want to see them? And she read them and loved them. And she's sending them to some of her colleagues to see if they also give the check mark, you know, but whether they go anywhere or not, at least it's cool to know, wait a minute, these don't have to be all dead. These things that I thought were ignored and long gone. So it's kind of,
they're like a fine wine. They're aging to perfection.
Sure. That's I had to revise them a little bit. So I wouldn't say perfection, but they're aging to, the people around them are aging to the point where they finally appreciate it.
They were before their time. Yeah. I mean, if you wrote them before like the iPhone existed, it might be time for an update.
Yeah. I think we all grow as writers, or I hope we all grow as writers too. So there was definitely some moments in there that I was like, ew. But then there were also moments that really surprised me when I'm like, wow, was I a better writer back then than I am now? You know, I think I mentioned this last time we talked. Sometimes I look at my old stuff and I was like, where did this brilliance come from?
Yeah, it's true. I can't get there anymore. Yeah. I don't like to admit that. I read my own book, you know, and I'd be like, wow, that's actually pretty decent. Yeah. It is pretty funny because a part of you is like your ego gets a little bit of a bump from that, but at the same time, you want to try and stay humble. So that's awesome. All right. So very good. So you've got some more films coming out. Are you thinking of going back into the game industry?
I'm not like out of it per se. I recently wrote on Rival Peak, which was a game TV hybrid show cool. that Facebook put on. So that was pretty cool. Yeah, that was like, I guess it's already 5 months ago at this point, but so that was a more recent project. I've talked to some people about doing projects here and there, and I think it's just as long as it's the right one that I'm passionate about. And now I'm learning more about what I can say no to or what I should say no to.
That's cool.
So that's important to me. You know, if it's like certain kind of mobile games, or if it's like that one where they wanted to pay per word and I tried it out, I was just like, oh, you know, at this point I'm realizing that I have to charge such high rates for these things to feel like it's worth my time, that it's probably not worth their time.
I think it's awesome to get to that point to where you can finally say no, because so many writers out there like feel like they have to jump and say yes to every gig that comes their way, even if it's like a bad gig, just because they're trying to get their credit or they need just a little bit of cash. Right. And it's good to see a writer get to that point where you're like, you know, I don't need this gig.
You know, what we are trying to do is we're thinking about how to put a video game together for this animated film that we're doing. So we're talking to some investors right now from cool. China, I think. So that's an idea. And then I'd be at the higher level of that, you know, as like a studio exec. So I could hire some people to make it awesome. And so we'll see if that happens. People check in with me in about a year or two from now and see what happened. But fingers crossed. And then I'm looking at other positions too here and there, because sometimes I go through these phases where I like enjoy just sitting home and writing for like 4 or 5 months. And then I'm like, I got to get out there and be with people and get on a team. Yes, I go up and down on that.
get in the writer's room. So what do you recommend before we go? What do you recommend for writers out there really, really looking to make it happen? I mean, you're a guy that started out in the military and then found them way into becoming a professional writer, which is amazing. So one last piece of advice.
Sure. I think the big part of it is, of course, as we've discussed, the networking, putting yourself out there, letting other people know you're excited. I just put a feeler out to this veterans group that I'm part of to see about that writing assistant job that I might try to hire somebody for. And a few people have been very enthusiastic and approaching. And so I think, like, don't be afraid to submit for these things, but I also think don't be afraid to submit for things you don't think you're qualified for. Like,
that's good advice.
One thing I did at TellTale, I think it asks for X amount of experience. I had 0 experience.
Yeah.
But what I had experience working in the military and in the government, working on things like war games or those kind of planning scenarios. And in a way, those are very similar. You're thinking about player agency. You're thinking about what the participants of the war game or the, whatever you call it, disaster response scenarios we had done for the Haiti response and whatnot. Haiti earthquake in 2008, was it? 10?
Okay.
I forget now. But mine's vanishing, going away. So I was able to spin that kind of stuff to say, I haven't done exactly this, but here's what I have done that I could see how it very much relate. And sometimes they buy that, sometimes they don't. But if you do a good job of, selling that while also really expressing your passion and having some good writing samples, of course. I was able to also talk about how I wrote comics when I was 12, just for fun. And we tried to pitch a video game to Capcom, I think, when I was 12. And when I say tried, we just picked up the phone on the back of the game box and tried to tell them. And they're like, "You're 12? That's not how it works, dude."
That's awesome.
Like these kind of stories that you can bring up. Like I had totally forgot about that stuff. But when you're preparing for the interview, you start thinking about what kind of story can I tell for why I'm the perfect person for this gig. And hopefully all these ideas will start popping up like, oh, yeah, that thing. Oh, that other. And if you just mention that, it might be like the stupidest thing in the world, like that little video game story. Who cares? But to them, they might see that as, oh, okay, they've had a passion since they were 12. They have this full story they can tell. Why I started writing was because of Game of Thrones. So when I walked into TellTale, I didn't know they were doing Game of Thrones. But then when I saw that on the walls, I was like, oh, and I was able to bring that up in the interview.
That's awesome.
Yeah, without trying to sound like too much like a fanboy. Yeah.
So you weave a narrative basically to sell yourself to the company. And really make sure you're passionate. Of course, have strong writing samples, as you mentioned. But that's perfect. I think that's exactly what you should do. And I love the advice of don't be afraid to aim high.
Yeah,
I'm the guy that always steps on the plate and swings away. And it's worked in my favor. I mean, I've missed spectacularly, but I've had a few home runs. So I think it's absolutely important to not live in fear or live in that mindset that you're not good enough. You got to at least try for it, and they'll let you know. They'll let you know if you are or aren't. Oh, well, thank you so much for being on with us, Justin.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
And now where can people find you?
My books are on Amazon. Just search Justin Sloan on Amazon or Twitter. I have the initial in there, so it's at Justin M. Sloan, M as in Michael. Okay. I think that should do.
All right. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share in your social media where you can tag us at The Successful Screenwriter.